Thanks everyone for dialing in, and I am more delighted than usual, because I know many of you have spoken, so I wasn't any less delighted to introduce any of you. But I'm especially delighted today to introduce Daniella Scalice, who is the Education and Communications Lead for NASA's astrobiology program. She is a co-founder of a 15-year-long partnership between NASA and the Navajo Nation. She's doing what I think is amazing and important and interesting work. So I've wanted to reach out to Daniella for a while after coming across some of the educators' guides that the NASA and the Navajo Nation partnership put together. So I finally did it, and so we have Daniella with us today, and I will let Daniella introduce herself more if she wants to, because I'm sure you'd all much rather listen to Daniella today than me. So Daniella, I'm going to hand it over to you, and yep, feel free to share your screen and let us know how interactive you want this to be. And so take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you today. Thank you so much, Pavarthi, for the invitation. I'm just thrilled to be here and share with you all and talk with you and hear what's going on in your world. I'm hoping this will be very interactive and that we can, I have some slides and I have stuff to share with you about the partnership and so forth. But I'm hoping we can have more of a dialogue than anything else. So please feel free to jump in at any time or put something in the chat and we can sort of come back to it, whatever works. I'm just thrilled to be here and have time together. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Share a PowerPoint, really. And I'll go full screen. Okay, is everyone seeing that?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, good. So I struggle with what to call stuff. So today I'm calling it power and co-creation. And I should say I don't see the chat. So if anything comes up, please do let me know if someone would jump in and let me know. So as you mentioned, Pavarthi, I am with NASA's astrobiology program. I'm the Education and Communications Lead, and I've been with NASA 20 years this summer. It's flown by, so I can hardly believe it. And most of that time, I've been involved with a partnership we're going to talk a little bit about today with the Navajo Nation, which has led to partnerships with many other Native nations, tribes, and bands all over the US and in Canada. So by way of introduction, I think the only thing I would really add to what you said is that I live and work on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, on the lands of the Piscataway people in the occupied territories known today as Annapolis, Maryland, United States, North America. And they are still here. So, okay, I have a few slides to kind of chat through, and I'm anxious to hear your thoughts about all this stuff, and then we'll talk about the partnership. Oops. All right. So I wanted to kind of frame things to begin with this idea of vision. I know that there's been a lot of talk in our world lately about, which is unraveling right before our very eyes. And this is a huge opportunity, as I hope you'll agree, to remake it in a way that we know is better and we know is right and we know is just. So I think all of us, I hope all of us have been envisioning that world. And it probably looks something like this: a diverse community of scientists working in unison, exploring the universe, learning about our origins, seeing if we're alone. That's sort of the astrobiology part of it. I know not everybody on the call is an astrobiologist, but this is how we think. And, working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, every color, culture, gender, walk of life, ability, way of loving, way of praying, we're together. We're sharing all of ourselves. We're bringing our unique perspective and our ways of knowing to the work. As we know, the environment that we work in, do all this great stuff in, often precludes this. And this is part of what we need to have a vision to fix. So I would posit to you that in order to achieve this vision, we need to go on a journey. So what does that journey look like? It is an inward journey. We can talk about things external to us, like policies and practices and institutional this and that and the other, and how all these external things need to change. But I think way before that happens, we need to go on this inward journey and walk this path of self-exploration and personal evolution, and understanding, learning, getting smart about why the vision has to be a vision and it isn't here today. We need to shed all of the things within us so that we can shed the things around us, external to us, that are getting in the way of this. And this is a journey we have to walk every single day for the rest of our lives, period. There is no break from this. There is self-care, but this is forever. And doing less risks the very integrity of the vision. We have a huge responsibility. When white Eurocentric Western values continue to dominate, we risk the perpetuation of inequality, because the equality will be performative. That's not okay. That's not how we get to the vision. And we have to question, we have to look around, what have and are our colleagues of color sacrificing to be in the space right now with us together? What are they going through? What have they gone through? What's happening today in their lives to be here? And how can we co-create a space in which no one ideology is dominant, where it's okay for knowledge systems that are very different to be equal in the same space? How can we create a space where everybody is safe to bring their whole self to the endeavor? So why would we want to do this? What is our motivation? What should our motivation be? Very important to examine motivations. And I think the general talk in the scientific community anyway about this motivation has to do with the fact that equity, diversity, and inclusion and diverse teams produce more innovative results, and the science gets better, right? The work improves. And I understand that that's true. There's sort of data, right, on that, and that's fine. But I would like us to question that motivation. And I want to read to you a quote on how to do that and how to maybe get in touch with the real motivation that we should be having. And this is from a young man called Kishan Ivory, who was a guest blogger on Black and Astro for Astrobytes. And he says, I'll just read it out, bear with me. Diverse perspectives yield the best science is a true statement, but it's one that commodifies the lived experience of marginalized people by reducing them to their contributions to productivity. It's a capitalist framework that shirks the basic truth that cultivating a field where the norm is respecting the humanity and validity of all people is the right thing to do for no other reason than that it is right. So I invite you to embrace this as your motivation. And if the science gets better, lovely. But that's not it. That's not where it begins and ends. So, okay, so we've got our motivation to take this journey, to realize this vision. I want to offer some ideas about where to start, what the first steps might be in going forward together. And they have to do with power. I encourage you in every space you're in, wherever it is, first and always look to the power dynamics. Name yourself and everybody else in the power dynamics. Who has power, who doesn't, why? And to work diligently, no matter what it takes. It'll take everything maybe, and that's okay, to make sure that power is shared and that those with less power have a safe space to use their voice and express themselves authentically. We need to understand, quote, social practice as layered with concurrent power imbalances, foreclosing on some and making room for others to negotiate and pursue desired ends. This is a quote from Vince Anderson. And I offer you the idea that when you have power, you actually don't have more rights, you have more responsibilities. So if we can start this practice, this is hard. And it's okay that it's hard. There's lots of programming and conditioning upon us all that would prevent this kind of examination and restructuring of power dynamics. But if we can start here and start practicing with it, I think it's going to go a long way. Okay, so we have our vision, we have our journey, we have our motivation, we have some potential first steps. And I want to tell the story now of what can possibly happen when those things are happening and they're in alignment, and how we can work toward anti-racist culture in the work that we do. And what lies at the heart of the story that I want to tell you about the partnership is this idea of co-creation, that this is what's possible and this is what enables things going forward. So I want to offer a few words about that, and then we'll get into the story. Co-creation is a power dynamic. It's possible when you have a shared vision. A shared vision is possible when you have a relationship and trust that you build over time. Relationship and trust are possible when humility and respect are centered. And centering humility and respect is always an option, always available to you. You just have to recognize it and choose it. So let's look at some of the things that might stand in the way of choosing and centering humility and respect. Values of the white Eurocentric Western culture, again and again, preempt us from working from that space. And those values are centered on hubris, entitlement and extraction, cognitive imperialism and cultural hegemony, which result in continued racialization and colonization all day, every day for our colleagues and friends of color here in the US, in the white supremacist culture of the US. So becoming aware of it is the first step. I suspect many of you are already aware of it. And so forgive me for sharing with you what you already know, but I wanted to just put co-creation in this context because it is at the heart of the story. And so let the story begin. We have come to call ourselves the NASA and the Navajo Nation Partnership. We're a collaborative project. This is our team. We started, I'm going to tell you the whole story of how we started off, but I'd like to show everybody on whose behalf and with whose permission I am presenting to you today, especially the two folks on the far right. Dana Desiderio is on the far right, and her mom, it turns out, Angela Barninez, are my two main partners in all of this. And they are born and raised and lived their whole lives on the Navajo Nation. Okay, so 2005, 15 years ago, in January, what we call the focus group, it really wasn't a focus group, it was more of a roundtable dialogue, was convened. We had some funds from NASA specifically to do this kind of dialogue, which was great. And folks from all across the Navajo Nation came. Tribal government people, community leaders, medicine people, educators, parents, sectors that had nothing to do with education, folks were there. And the question was on the table: is the Navajo Nation interested in partnering with NASA on education initiatives? And I always show this slide because this is the most important thing. What we did downstream, I'll tell you about all the curricula we made and the programs we do and show you pictures of people having a great time and workshops and stuff. This is the most important part of it, because this way of beginning acknowledges sovereignty and self-determination of Native people and centers them in the decision-making process about what's good for them and what vision they have for their youth, and if they want to partner, and if so, how. Oftentimes, again, the hubris, people at NASA, places like NASA, assume they walk into spaces like this in a particular power dynamic and talk about, science and the way the universe works, and scientific knowledge about that is the ultimate truth, and bring a lot of white saviorship to the space. And here, let's bring you education and real science, and you're welcome. And that's riddled with hubris, and often the programs are very extractive. So anyway, I like to make sure that I begin with this, and I offer you this paradigm as a way of working in humility and respect, and asking if people even want what you have, or even want to partner with you. So there's lots going on at that time. I certainly learned a lot about how education works on the reservation. There was new tribal legislation being put up at the time called the Sovereignty and Education Act, which eventually came to pass, toward which the development of Navajo-specific, culture-specific teaching and learning standards and teaching materials were going to be needed. So there was this big landscape in which this question was being posed. And the discussion was wide-ranging. I pulled out a few points to share with you. from the Navajo side of the house, and this quote is from Angie, who you saw a moment ago, you know, the kind of major message was that the Navajo education system is not the Western European education system, and you know, kind of got colonized by that, and they want to rebuild. They're visioning a new way of doing things for their youth for the long term, a way that, quote, preserves and perpetuates the identity and authenticity of what it means to be Navajo. So that was really where they were coming from. They were approaching the partnership with that vision. And from our side of the house, it was very lovingly, gently, but firmly made clear that NASA was not being invited to fix something. White saviorship was not welcome here. Not that we were bringing it in, but healthy boundaries are important and beautiful. But that our role rather was to get on board with that shared vision and serve, bring whatever science and NASA has to bear on service to Dene. Dene is the other word for Navajo. That's the word in their language that they refer to themselves. Dene youth and communities, and represent the science authentically, and contribute to the vision for the future that they are holding. And you know, the basic outcome was that, yeah, let's do this. We'd love to collaborate with NASA. The partnership needs to be equitable. Both ways of knowing and both bodies of knowledge systems, if you like, need to be worked with in a way that they're 100% equal. No one is going to dominate over the other, no matter what we co-create coming down the pike. And so anything we do make together needs to reflect this truth. And if sort of we as NASA couldn't get on board with that, they didn't say it this way, but it really wasn't going to work if we at NASA couldn't get on board with this. And I didn't have a problem with it, but I know a lot of people do. So I want to help with that. Anyway, this is where trust started to be earned. There's a whole history you can imagine, and we can talk about that if you like. Trust between Native nations and federal government is, you know, just broken. So it needs to be re-earned. And we revisit these principles all the time. This is not something that happened 15 years ago, and I'm still talking about it today. This is central, absolutely central. We still continue to build consensus, even now, around this. Okay, so here are the pretty pictures part. These are the two educator guides we co-created, and this is with the work of many Navajo educators, cultural experts, medicine people, spiritual advisorship, sharing stories, if you will. I use the word tellings. Stories can be very pejorative. Cultural knowledge, really, into the space, us sharing the same from the Western scientific side of the house. Very co-creative, very exciting process to see the two things come into the same space at the same time and interact and come out in educational activities for kids, for Navajo youth. And this, I mean, this is pictures, but this really represents the bulk of the work. This was probably, between the two of them, 8 years in the making. And we've come to call our philosophy of making the materials and making the programs I'll talk about in a few minutes, how we work. We've come to call it culturally based dual learning. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that means. These are images from the teacher workshops. We have a 2-day model we've been working with, very flexible, but this is what we've landed on, where we use the lessons from those booklets and we sort of pick some of them and help the teachers get familiar with them and act them out. And we have deep background offered by NASA scientists as well as cultural knowledge holders and medicine people. And we have another program that we do regularly also, where it's a residential summer camp we house at one of the tribal colleges on the nation. And we get on the bus every day and we go to sacred sites that are also geologically instructive and fascinating and wonderful. And same idea, there's NASA scientists on the trail, and there's spiritual advisors and medicine people and knowledge holders on the trail. And we just talk story while we hike around and be in the space and learn together in this dual learning way. And the culturally based part of it is really important. I want to talk about that more. Because it's one thing to bring these two things together into the same space at the same time and know that they are equal, but it's another to privilege cultural knowledge, if you will. There's a reason we do it that way. So what does that really look like? In order to properly give that part to you, I want to share with you, with permission, a concept in Diné culture called Shapik ego. And this is a concept that governs, if you will, many, 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 many parts of cultural and spiritual life. One of them is how one learns and how knowledge is generated. So it's a scientific method, if you will. And it has to do, if you focus on the image on the left, this is from the tribal college, and they bring Shapik ego movement into their philosophy of education and learning and creating knowledge. And so, as you can see, the white space corresponds to the east, and there are certain elements and ideas that are affiliated with that. Moving to the right around in the blue space, that is south, and there are objects and ideas and things in that space. And then the yellow is west and the black is north. And so Shapik ego actually refers to the image of, quote, the apparent movement of the sun as perceived from your perspective, looking from within the Navajo traditional ceremonial building, which is called a hogan. And it is, and there's a hole in the top of it. And so as the sun appears to move from east to west, this sort of circle is drawn, if you will, on the floor from east, south, west, north, east, south, west, north every day. So everything aligns to that movement. So let's look a little bit closer. So starting in the east, I've shifted everything a little bit, turned to the right. So east on your right is this space of developing ideas and curiosity and questioning and critical thinking, using your imagination, the dawn, spring, east, the light, the first light. Moving into the south, this idea of building, creating, motivating, implementing, manifesting, doing, midday, summer, full expression, living life. Your ideas are in effect. And then in the West, things are culminating. We're gathering our information, we're reviewing our accomplishments, we're looking at our data, if you will, analyzing them, reflecting them, harvesting the knowledge. This is the sunset, this is the end of the day, this is fall, autumn, that kind of thing. And then moving into the north, which is, again, affiliated with the color black and night. You're drawing your conclusions, you're building your knowledge, you're solidifying your wisdom and your truth. And it's all coming together and it's ready to move back into the east at dawn. So this is a very important pattern. And as I say, it governs a lot more than just the creation of knowledge and learning and teaching in Navajo culture. But it's the basis for this activity that we made in the first educator guide that I want to walk you through so that I can help convey what we mean when we say culturally based dual learning. We put the cultural knowledge first. It is at the center. We privilege it. We go deep into it for a long time, and then we bring in the Western scientific concepts. And this activity, I think, helps convey that. So the activity is one of my Navajo colleagues reads aloud an origin story, a story of the Diné cosmology and how everything started and how all creation was brought into being, if you will, by spiritual entities according to this Shapik ego pattern. Everything was sort of laid down, so to speak, first in the east, south, west, north, and then the next thing, east, south, west, north, the next thing, east, south, west, north, and around and around and around until the universe was complete. So we have cards that correspond to all those things that got created, and we put them in piles on a table. So imagine yourself listening to a story and things are being created and laid down in this pattern, and you have cards and you to correspond and you put them down on the table. So it starts with naming the directions and kind of orientation, if you will. Then later on in the story, different gemstones are produced. In the east, it's abalone shell. Sorry, no, in the east, it's, I think they just call it white shell. In the south, it's turquoise. In the west, it's abalone. And in the north, it's obsidian. And these we take as figurative expressions of, you know, sort of solid earth material, so to speak. These translate also into the 4 sacred mountains, which physically bound the sacred homeland and reservation of the Navajo Nation. And they are actual mountains in existence. And one is in the east, south, west, and north. So these got put in very early. Wind came through, different types of wind corresponding to these directions. That has something to do with the introduction of moisture or lack thereof. And so seasons come into being, and on and on and on. And I'm not doing the whole activity, I'm just giving the highlights. But on and on and on. And there's these piles of cards in each direction. And there's a million things embedded in this. And my colleague Dana, who I showed you a moment ago, is a linguist. And so she goes deep into the cultural knowledge of this story, this telling, but also the language and all of the incredible concepts that are embedded in the language, in these words. So it's very rich. And here on this table in front of the children is the complete Diné cosmology, is the Navajo universe. There it is, it's done. This is how it got created, the end, it's perfect. And so then I come in and I share the story of stellar evolution, of the formation of a star, how the star arises, how it comes into its mature self, how it creates in its star body all of the elements that eventually end up in other planets and life here on Earth anyway, and the whole physical universe, and how stars created and are still creating, you know, these basic elements, carbon and oxygen and nitrogen, and on and on and on. And so they are creators. That's why this is an origin story, is because stars do that. And they did that. And that's how we got here. And we're made of star stuff. And then we talk about how a star comes to the end of its life. And if it goes by supernova, it has this ability to sort of trigger the next generation of star formation, and the cycle begins again. And so we have cards that correspond to those concepts, that cosmology. And in the east, we put an image of a giant molecular cloud, a nebula from which stars come through. Artist images of a baby solar system coming into being with the star in the middle, and planets forming around it. In the west, a mature star, an image of our sun in this case. And again, that's where the story comes through about the creation of all the atoms and the elements and them ending up in our bodies. And then an image of a supernova remnant. And when it's appropriate, I make it very clear that our sun is not going to go supernova, and that these are just representations of the story. But for the most part, we're illustrating concepts here. And so there you have it. So, and then we take it one step further, and we hearken back to the information that was conveyed about Shapik ego with respect to learning and knowledge creation, and we make a parallel and a resonance with the scientific method as well. And we talk about the East aligning with inquiry and hypothesis, and in the South, you're doing your experiments, you're making your observations, you're collecting your data, you're sort of pursuing your questions. In the West, you're culminating, you're collecting your data, you're analyzing them, you're starting to draw your conclusions in the North, and, you know, solidifying your knowledge, and of course, it leading to next questions. So this is the way in which we privilege and center Indigenous knowledge, and we align and resonate Western scientific knowledge to it. So that's what we mean by culturally based dual learning. Just a couple more slides and I'm hoping we can chat. I hope I'm not going off too much here. Okay, it's only 2:30. This is an activity we have been building, and it's not quite ready yet. These are some teachers we kind of working on it with, where we're taking, as you can see on the bottom left bottom there, this image of it's actually a timeline, and it's huge. It's like, I don't even know how many feet long, like 20 feet long. And we tape it onto the wall, and it starts on the left-hand side with the Big Bang and ends on the right-hand side there, that you can see with today. And along it is, you know, marked all of the eras and the eons and what have you, geologically and stuff. And also major milestones in the evolution of life on Earth. And you can see here on the bottom right, there's a lot of stuff happening close to now in terms of the first grasses and plants and, you know, people and zebras and all that stuff. Whereas most of the timeline is sort of blank. It's like time, 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 time. Oh, the first cell, time, 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 time. Another thing. So anyway, we have that whole timeline from the Western scientific version of the cosmology. And then, well, I should say, before we talk about all of that, my Navajo colleagues talk about this other aspect of their cosmology that is much bigger than the story that gets told in the activity I just shared with you. And it has to do with a progression through 4 worlds, the 4th of which we are in now. And the way that story is told, and the knowledge about what happens in each world and the transition between each world and how things move through to the next world or don't, there are huge parallels and resonances that are remarkable that we're drawing between events on that timeline, if you will, and events on the Western scientific timeline. Part of what we're struggling with is this concept of time and linearity. Is that a word? Linear is being linear. So we're still working that out. But the 4 worlds correspond to colors. There's a black world, blue world, a yellow world, and a white world. And so you can see the different colors of yarn that folks are working with to kind of resonate between the timeline on the wall and the Dene cosmology. Anyway, we're working on that one. We're applying our principles of dual learning to that one. And I also just wanted to share with you some images and of how the dual learning works in the camps as well. These are images from Chaco Canyon, which is near the Navajo Nation and has a relation to their history and as a people. So we go there with the kids, and we, from the scientific side of the house, we talk about the Western Interior Seaway and how Chaco Canyon was basically waterfront property a long time ago. And indeed, on the upper left, those are fossilized shrimp burrows, and we look at shark's teeth that have been collected and so on. We also talk about, connections to planetary science and other worlds. We talk about archaeoastronomy, to use the Western term. And we look at the structures that the ancient people who lived there, the Chacoan, of the quote Chacoan Empire, they used their buildings basically to do astronomy. And anyway, we have all this wonderful exploration and talk. And one of the kids at the end of that day, we're doing meaning making. What did you learn today at the end of the day? And she said, at Chaco, the people may be gone, but the spirits are still there. And the ancient sea is gone, but the rocks record its presence. So these are the kinds of connections that kids are making. And similar story here at Canyon de Chelly, which is in northern Arizona. We do box canyon geology and all kinds of, fundamental geological concepts like that. And there's also a lot of petroglyphs there, and we talk all about those and who was there and who didn't, what they mean, and making comparisons geologically to Mars and other stuff. And anyway, one of the kids said, both the rocks, I have to move something in order to read this. Can you read it? There we go. Both the rocks themselves and the petroglyphs tell a story. So they're connecting to, what geology really is storytelling about what happened, and how people did that too with the petroglyphs. So this is, again, more examples of dual learning. Oops, sorry. So to sum it all up, we're basically working with astrobiology as an origin story to simultaneously cultivate cultural and scientific identity for people. Native youth have one foot in each world. They have to live that way because of colonization and what happened here in the US. So how can we work with that to take steps forward? We have to go from either or to yes and. We have to go from, well, you can either be Navajo or you can be a scientist, to you are already both. Your cultural identity is inherently scientific. So with that, I'm hoping we can have a good discussion, and my parting thought with you is just use your power wisely. It can be done. Okay, stop sharing.
All right, thanks so much, Daniella. And I am going to open it up for people to chime in with any thoughts or questions that they have. You know, go ahead, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you have a question or thought or comment, feel free.
I was thinking as you were presenting the sort of cyclical creation story and your story about stellar evolution, I was also thinking about cyclical extinctions and the sort of generative power of wiping life off the face of the earth, and how that results in this radiation. Like, all the potential is there in the DNA to create all these new forms. It takes like that extension, then you have the sort of maturation of ecosystems, and then it cycles back again. And I thought that just kind of crossed my mind as you were telling that story.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the pattern, the cyclical pattern, it governs so much of how the universe works, and how, and we can see it manifested everywhere. We've talked about putting in layers to this that do like the rock cycle and the water cycle, the cell cycle, on and on and on. So it's there. It's central for sure.
Can you tell us a little more about how the activities involved? I could see young people there, I could see educators there. What level was this at? Because the product was really a beautifully integrated system. So how, in fact, did that work?
It works with everybody, you know, in terms of what words I use, and the words my cultural expert counterparts use. You know, we can tailor that to who's in the learning space, and we can go off on deep tangents or not. But it absolutely works for everyone. I personally think there's a lot that's intuitive about connecting to cyclicality. We just live that way. We know that way. We can bring in, as I mentioned, you know, analogies for maybe for the little ones, for maybe for everybody, of the day, you know, morning, afternoon, evening, night. That helps connect to the cycles, the seasons.
Yeah.
Whenever, you know, whatever devices you need to use, it works for everybody. Everybody connects to it for sure.
Yes, but how did you go from our normal, this is what the moon does, this is what Mars does, this is the way the solar system works, to the context, which clearly relates much more to the culture of the people that you're working with? So how did you get to that stage? I understand how the product evolved, but it's getting in it from one cultural perspective into a different cultural perspective. And how did that come together?
If I understand you correctly, I think the answer is centering cultural knowledge and grounding in the cultural understanding and deep knowledge
Yes,
of
and who defined
cyclicality.
that knowledge?
Who defined it? Sorry?
Yes, who
Yeah.
stipulated that knowledge? Clearly there's back and forth. So how do you get that recognition of the knowledge and how to translate it into the context that worked well? So I'm not perhaps explaining myself correctly, but I'm thinking how to use this for example, working with other cultures as well, is how do you get the structure so that everyone's comfortable with it to begin with, without saying, well, we know this, you know that, let's put it together. You know, that's exactly what you're saying should not be done. So how do you get it started so that everyone is actually comfortable with the product?
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I think that's a very different answer, and it has to do with the first of the story, the first bits of the story, which have to do with the approach, which is centered on recognition and acknowledgement and respect of sovereignty and self-determination, and a willingness to follow that lead. And it has to do with building trust through relationship over time, over lots of time, typically. And so that there is comfort, so that when you do come together into the co-creative space, it can be authentically co-created. Stories, tellings, ideas, concepts like Shavik Ego and the origin story that was shared into the partnership, so that people are comfortable bringing those things forward without risking cultural appropriation, without risking extraction and NASA taking it and saying, thank you, goodbye. Co-creation, in my experience and in my opinion, is not possible without a foundation of relationship and trust. And so I think that's the answer to your question. But once we got to the space of ready to co-create and trust was in place, you know, our methods were really, again, looking to our Indigenous colleagues as the leaders, the ones holding the visions, the one holding the knowledge around which we can bring Western concepts to into the dual learning environment. Does that answer? Is that
yes, it's maybe let me push you a little bit further. Is you use the word us and our, and I'm not sure what that means. Was that the NASA workshop? Was that the group that really had this integrated leaders from both cultures working together? Was it the workshop itself? How do you get to this consensus of the people who are working together to make it work? And who is us? Who is our, you know?
I think the way I've been using it, us, is myself and the other people you saw in the pictures. We really came together after that roundtable dialogue early on and decided, yes, we want to carry this forward. Yes, we want to build relationship together. Yes, we want to see if we can co-create something along these principles of centering Indigenous knowledge and preserving and protecting it, that kind of thing. The only other thing I would add, I think, unless there's more from you, is that once we sort of arrived at the co-creative space as a team, our way of working was very organic, and it reflects humility, empathy. It reflects not the usual values of hubris and entitlement and extraction and NASA's here, everything's going to be okay type stuff. Things were very organic. And again, it was about what's being shared into the partnership from their side of the house, from the Navajo side of the house, and how can we work to that. And my personal philosophy is that when things are shared into the space, stories from both sides, if you will, that it's the science, it's the story, it's the knowledge that's in those two pieces, in those pieces that are shared into the space with trust. The stories are gonna tell us what to do and not the other way around. That's my personal philosophy, that we don't have to manage and wrangle the material into relationship. The material is already in relationship. And if we're paying attention and the space is truly reflective of trust and relationship and co-creativity, if we just listen, the material will tell us how it wants to be. And that's kind of how we worked. So I apologize if that's vague or if I'm way off, but that's our experience.
I'm curious how the meeting came about in the first place. Who approached whom, and how was the appropriate connection made with the right people in the Navajo Nation to actually carry this conversation forward?
Thank you. That is a piece I didn't highlight. The answer is a pre-existing relationship by one of the team members who was in the picture, a white woman, I think she was to my left, next to me. And her name is Alice, and she had been in a relationship with Angie for quite some time. They had done work together. They had made a film together called Navajo Women Warriors, because Angie's a military veteran. And they had met in a very serendipitous way at the Veterans Memorial in DC, where ceremonies were taking place on Veterans Day, sort of years prior to that. So they had built relationship and trust, and then a brilliant solicitation construct was put forward by NASA's office, at the time, Office of Education, where they had a two-part solicitation architecture. One was for people to hold these roundtable dialogues in a very focused way. I think some of the other winners of those awards were a dialogue with 4-H, a dialogue with the librarians broadly, after school organizations, just kind of these different dialogues. And are you interested in partnering with NASA? How can we best serve you? What do you need? And so forth. What would the collaboration need to look like with all these different groups? And then from the output of those dialogues came a second solicitation where you could apply for funds to build on what you said you'd like to do. So that's how we got going. And I will say to whoever will listen at any day, that is the way to go. Invest, put money into relationship building for relationship building's sake, without knowing if or what you might co-create down the line in terms of curricula or programming or anything, or scientific collaborations, whatever it is, that's way downstream. Put the money in relationship building first for as long as it takes, and then have follow-up solicitations. In fact, I just submitted a decadal paper with this very assertion. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's how it started.
I think that's really interesting, considering how much organizations are being pushed these days to have metrics for the success of the initiatives that they do. So this one, I think, kind of roundtable discussion, it would be hard to define what the metric is other than we had the discussion. And then to put funds into it, again, it would be hard to define what success looks like at the outset. So knowing that you won money to do this, did you try to define some kind of metrics, and what were those, that so that you could speak the language of the funders, but also do what you were trying to do with this relationship building?
I'm not sure if I know how to answer that. I don't think we defined metrics around what success looks like. And I don't think the solicitation did that for us. It really was a different kind of solicitation than NASA is used to doing. However, NSF does these all the time. You know, they have these multi-tracked things going on in any given program or solicitation thing that they have going on, where you can do, you know, just conferences and workshops first. You can do baselining, you can do these roundtables, you can get the lay of the land, you can see if people are interested, and it's okay. You know, like, that's enough. The fact that you did it is enough. I would even push even further to say that the solicitation should just be about the potential for relationship building, that there doesn't even need to be a roundtable or a meeting, or that needs to be organic, and that needs to be supported free from these structures of what success looks like.
Does NASA still have a mechanism for doing that sort of relationship building? I mean, is there still, you know, I mean, are there still funds for that sort of work?
This particular solicitation architecture out of the Office of Education is long gone, and I have not seen it come back as such at all. And to my knowledge of what comes out of the Office of Education today, which is now called the Office of STEM Engagement, but anyway, is nothing like that. What comes out of the Science Mission Director is nothing like that. It's all focused on the deliverable side, what they call the deliverable side of things, which are, you know, outputs, doing programs, making curricula, creating museum exhibits, whatever the thing you're going to make is, research collaboration, whatever. And not not in recognition of the fact that in order to do those things with any kind of success defined by anybody, you need to have relationship and trust in place, and that takes time, and it should be funded as a deliverable. There, that's the soapbox. So no, I am not seeing that at all. Maybe somebody else is, and please jump in if you do. I'd love to know about it.
I see we have a couple of comments in the chat. So Vince Rue says, I'm so happy you're here. I love your last statement that you're already scientists. And Michael Poston says, and this is with respect to funding relationship building, that requires a lot of trust between the government and scientists that doesn't seem to exist these days.
I'd love to hear more about that, Michael, and what you're perceiving, and trust between the government and the scientists, or trust between those two things and Native nations? I don't know, maybe he's not there.
So,
government with scientists, I see.
Wait,
Sorry, I'm in the lab. I'll try talking just because it's faster. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was meaning the government and the government's own scientists need to trust each other at that level first, which is not something I'm seeing right now. Yeah, that's most of the thought.
What are your thoughts about why that's not the case and what needs to be done to get there?
Starts heavily leaving science and going to politics to answer that question. I think it's a reflection of the way that our nation has been has arrived in this kind of us or them, two factions within the country state that we seem to be in right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of polarity, and that as I've been learning more and more about the hallmarks of Western Eurocentric white supremacist culture is on purpose, is to always create a manufactured differences between self and other, certainly along racial lines, along a lot of other lines too. And so, and it just breeds mistrust, and therefore it's easier to marginalize people and hold space for their suffering.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like in a way, building those relationships is even more important in that context than before. I mean, just that. For instance, we're looking around at each other now and saying, well, we need to be more diverse, we need to be more inclusive, and I think, and I think something that sort of came to my mind when I was listening to you, Daniela, is that, the relationships really are the cornerstone of that. You can't just sort of reach out and drag viewpoints and people together. There needs to be this sort of trust and relationship building there. Now, I know we're coming up on 3 p.m. I wish we could go for longer. Maybe we should schedule a part two of this discussion. But did anyone else have thoughts or questions that they wanted to share? I can.
Well, I had one other
say stuff.
question
Yeah, Emily,
that I
go
wanted to
ahead.
ask, which is, I think that you presented a really great partnership based on trust and sharing and prioritizing Navajo cultural knowledge to a primarily Navajo audience. Is there any mechanism by which what you developed there feeds back into NASA and teaches NASA something, brings some of that diversity into NASA and makes more people there a little bit more appreciative of this one aspect of American cultural diversity?
That's a good question. Thank you. I think of course the answer is definitely yes, and that it's kind of a whole other part of my work, or at least what I consider my professional identity, is to decolonize the agency from the inside out. And I have not focused on this idea, well, NASA should be investing in these relationships and co-creating these, educational programs so that it can learn something and the science can sort of benefit. That to me, that's just more extraction. And I'm trying to discourage that. And I didn't mean to imply that's what you were saying, and not at all. So that's not the platform that I stand on when I sort of turn and then look into the agency and try to do work there at all. But yes, that work continues there. And finally, something has happened. Unfortunately, people have had to risk and give their lives for this opportunity through the racism pandemic coming to a head and the viral pandemic coming to a head. People are dying for this opportunity. And finally, people within the agency are awake and potentially prepared to listen and change. But I think the first part of what I presented is, this idea of an inward journey and recognizing one's personal role, or at least one's institutional and professional role, and their professional identity as a scientist as totally embedded in and inseparable from the forces of colonization that are defining people's lives every day. And so that's something we can work with. that's something we can talk about. And we can talk about policy changes and solicitation changes and, all kinds of stuff like that. But if I'm doing anything in terms of how to help NASA evolve, it has to do with the inward journey part.
Yeah, I wish we had longer. I know we just have 2 minutes left, and I think that. All right, so I see Michael. Right, so Michael says, I really like the presentation and feel like I learned a lot. I very much appreciate the inclusion of the context at the beginning and in the questions. To me, this has connections and applications to so many other parts of our society. Thank you for presenting. And I can say better myself. So we are coming up on the hour. I don't want to keep people past 3 p.m. But thanks, Daniela. I mean, I really do wish we had more than an hour, and maybe we really should talk about scheduling a part 2 of this discussion, because I feel like you really have given us a lot to think about, and I sort of liked the note that you concluded your answer to Emily's question with just there, that it does start with us sort of examining what the things we value are, and how to act on those. So as the clock ticks 3, were there any final thoughts you wanted to leave us with?
Well, thank you. Yes, this was great. I'm so humbled to be able to share the story with you and talk with you about these issues. There is a lot more, and I do hope you schedule more. I think the one thing I just would impart is that this is doable. You all can do this. This is not this thing that exists outside you, if that's what you're feeling. I hope that we can part for now with a feeling of groundedness and empowerment, that this is all very, very possible and doable. And in fact, it's quite easy. So, and if you want to stay in touch and as you begin your journey, wherever you are on it, or continue your journey, I am here to support you. This is absolutely 100% easy and doable. I know you can do it if you wanted to.
All right, so with that, thanks again, Daniela, and I think we will call it a day for now. Thanks everyone for dialing in and for participating. Take care.
Thank you so much. All the best.